Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Software Plaza podcast. It's great to have you with us. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Software Plaza, and I love having conversations about all things technology, especially specifically around cloud native computing, DevOps, cloud security, observability, all of those good things. So if you're interested in that, then you'll love these conversations. And if you'd like to follow along, definitely go and subscribe. And wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, or you want to follow us on YouTube, we're on all the platforms. Just look for Software Plaza podcast. And today I have with me Brian Singer, who is the co-founder and chief product officer at Nobl9. That's Nobl and the number 9, nobl9.com. You can check them out. And we're going to be talking today a lot about agentic AI and just reliability. Just how do we make sure that reliability doesn't take a hit as organizations move towards agentic AI. That's kind of the focus of today. And Brian has done a lot of work in reliability at Google in the past, and now through his own startup with Nobl9. And we've had him on the show in the past. It's been, I think, a little over a year. So we got in touch and we asked him to come back on and tell us what's been happening because it seems like they've had a lot of changes in the past year, just shifting a lot of focus towards agentic AI and enabling that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And Brian, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining. Tell us about what's been happening in the past year. Where's your mind been at? What's been happening over at Nobl9? What's new?
Sure. Thank you, Twain. Thanks so much for having me back on. And these topics are really fun to talk about because there's so much happening right now. Um,
Mhm.
I think the past year has been really interesting because AI has gone from being something that was more of a toy that like you could do some cool parlor tricks with to something
Mhm.
where you now see, the largest, most sophisticated companies in the world rapidly adopting this technology for a very wide variety of use cases. So a lot of what we have done has been, I would say, just in response to where the general market has gone and the capabilities that
Right.
have been unlocked by the labs giving us more and more powerful models and harnesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I want to start by just reading the tagline on the Nobl9 website. It says AI writes the code, you set the rules, Nobl9 enforces them. Okay, so pretty clear there. A really crisp tagline. And I want to read further just the explanation of that, where it says agentic AI is shipping code faster than any team can review. SLOs are the only governance that scales with that velocity. Nobl9 lets AI create reliability feedback loops at the exact moment it creates your services. Okay, there's a lot to unpack in there, and we'll be
Yeah.
doing that through this conversation. I wanted to start with just talking about the impact of AI on reliability, because you've been focused on that even in the past before AI. But
Yeah.
now that AI has come along, what's been happening in the space of software reliability engineering and just reliability in general? What's changing? What's staying the same?
Yeah. So I look at it on a couple different vectors. One is if we look at what drives reliability and unreliability, change rate is a big piece of that. If and this just goes back to safety science, decades, the faster the rate of change, the more reliability challenges you're going to have. And
Hmm.
what's happened is we now have the ability to change code much, much more quickly than in the past because writing
Right.
code is no longer the bottleneck. The capabilities of the LLMs to write code, it's not always the best and prettiest code, although I will say it's getting better.
Really fast.
One of our engineers recently commented that some code that the LLM wrote was probably more sophisticated than he could write. So I look at it a little
Wow.
bit like how we went from writing, assembly code to compiled code, right? Where the
Mhm.
compilers are just so much more sophisticated at writing assembly. We're kind of on another. journey like that, where I fully expect in 2 to 3 years the code that an LLM writes is going to be more sophisticated than what you could write by hand. So
Hmm.
I don't think I'm alone in saying that the vast majority of the code that'll be created over the next, 5 years will probably be created by agents writing that code directed by humans in most cases. But what that does is it dramatically increases the change rate in our systems. And it
Right.
also makes it harder to understand what's being changed and what's going on. And so there's really two things that can happen. One is you can say, well, that's really just not acceptable. I have to have humans review the code. I have to have humans understand everything that's happening in the system. Well, if you do
Mm.
that, you're essentially throwing away a lot of the speed up that you can get with AI because
Mm.
every engineer I've talked to internally at Nobl9 says when you have AI write the code, but then you say a human has to review all the code, it's actually harder probably than a human writing the code to begin with because it's just,
Right.
we all have our own experiences with slop and whatnot. But so if
Hmm.
the real unlock is to actually have AI write and review the code and deploy the code and have guardrails in place to basically say the code is functioning the way that we want it to function and it's not breaking things that aren't meant to be broken. And so that's where we've focused a lot of our effort, really over the past maybe 6 months, is how do we apply the science of reliability and specifically using service level objectives to help us
Hmm.
unlock the pace of innovation that we can get from AI.
Interesting. Yeah, quite a few directions we can go with that. I want to ask about SLOs, but maybe before SLOs, I want to just ask about you mentioning that AI writes and reviews and deploys the code.
Yeah,
Then the natural question would be, what's the role of human developers in organizations? How is that changing? What would you say to
yeah.
that?
Yeah. Well, for one, don't see developers going away. I think developers are actually more important than ever because while AI can, I think, take away a lot of the drudgery from the tasks, like who wants to manage Git work trees, for example,
Hmm.
the actual context of what you're trying to get the AI to do is still going to be held by developers. And the quality of the end product, the quality of the software that you're actually delivering is still very much a function of the capability of the developer that's driving the AI to do that.
Right.
Because it may not be that you read all the code, but you can ask the AI what it's doing and you can give it instructions for how to do things better. And we find that things like architecture, being able to have that back and forth with the AI about how are we going to architect a specific capability? What are the impacts on performance and reliability for doing it this way versus that way? Um,
Mm.
uh, Even if the AI can help you understand the trade-offs, ultimately that's a human decision. Like how much risk do I want to take? How well does it
Right.
actually need to work? And
Hmm.
and so, I think the AI just allows us to move more quickly and more efficiently through the parts that maybe there was a little bit more drudgery before, but certainly
Hmm.
doesn't I think reduce the need for good developers to be controlling it.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah. That's interesting because then two words come from one is setting objectives, and you talk about SLOs a lot.
Yeah,
And two would be just owning outcomes and being able to understand the outcomes and query the bots on what they've done and tweak it where
yeah.
needed. So objectives and outcomes, and that seems to be still very human domain.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And if you think about it, you may have some business process you want to automate with AI, or you may have some user journey that you're working on with that AI. But you, as a human, understand the business context of what that user journey is doing and what the risks are of it not operating reliably. So it's still going to be our responsibility to inform the AI what the business context is. And the way that we're going to do that to ensure reliable operations is by, I believe, encoding that in a SLO. So you tell the AI, this is the objective for performance. This is what we want to measure it against. suggest an architecture that would allow us to meet this performance objective,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then being able to go back and forth. It's like having a very senior, staff SRE basically looking over your shoulder. But I want
Mm-hmm.
to talk about one other point, which I mentioned, in terms of I said there, there's this one vector of the change rate's going to go up, and maybe our ability to
Mm-hmm.
understand what's changing is going to go down. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, the tools that we have to do incident response and to understand what is going on in the system are improving via AI. So the other side of this coin is that when there is an issue, I think, already there's a lot of AI root cause analysis, AI SRE tools out there. Being
Mm-hmm.
able to feed the right context into those tools in terms of what actually matters when we're trying to do root cause analysis is another big unlock that we can get from SLOs. These SLOs can actually tell those tools, whether reliability is a consideration, right? Do we need to roll back because we're burning too much error budget, for example? And that I believe will over time operate more and more autonomously. Like certainly there will be a class of incidents and things that happen that the AI won't, sort of automatically be able to fix, and humans will need to be in the loop for that. But the tools that are there can help humans understand so much more quickly what is going wrong. Um, for example, understanding what's happening in logs or which logs to look at. This is something that is just not natural for people. Like you can get good at it, but it's just not necessarily natural. Oh, which service was this in? How do I grep for this log versus that log? What's the command for this run book? But the AI just can do that so much more quickly. So if you can give
Right.
it the right context, it can really be a powerful enhancer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And really, that is pretty much what software even started out to do, to achieve an objective. And it's all about that. And nobody sets out building an app just for the sake of building a bunch of complex things that
Yeah,
work together and then make everyone's life difficult. Everyone's trying to get to the end the fastest way possible using software. And I think in
that's
that
right.
sense, AI pretty much helps us get back to that original goal. And I think that's pretty cool. Um, it makes
Agreed.
me wonder, though, while this is good, there could also be some emerging blind spots because while the human could have a say in the objective and the outcome, there's lesser of a say in the middle along the way, and AI is having more of a say these days and will be in the coming days. In that sense, what are the new kinds of blind spots that would be emerging, and what are developers and the humans in the loop? What are they dealing with in terms of blind spots? How can they be better prepared for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the obvious one, which is as AI writes more and more of the code, there can certainly be situations where it's doing things that are not expected. For example, it might build a new service to solve some problem, and you might not even realize that it's building a new service and that it's creating a new dependency that needs to be monitored and tracked and everything else. So if you're not careful, and you don't know what it's doing, certainly it can create blind spots that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other blind spot that's I think very interesting, that's an emerging topic is as more and more processes are getting automated agentically. So in other words, we're using LLMs to automate this process. It really opens up an entirely new class of reliability problems for SREs to solve,
Right.
which is the reliability of our non-deterministic systems, which is arguably maybe a more formidable challenge for us because, and also I think an area where error budgets are very instructive, right? Because we know that if it's a non-deterministic system, it's not going to operate at 100% reliability just by definition, right? It's not going to get it right every time. But SREs are
Right.
very good at saying how much is good enough and are we meeting that objective? And so using SLOs and error budgets and SRE principles to manage the reliability of agentic workflows, I think is one of the blind spots that I'm starting to hear people talk about more and more. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
anybody has all the solutions. There's observability data you can get from the harness. There's observability data you can get from the LLM, but determining whether a particular response is adequate or suitable or correct is actually a very tricky challenge.
Hmm. Yeah, and talking about challenges, another one that I saw interestingly on your website was that you talk about micro outages, and I was just wondering if you could define for us like an example of a micro outage, and tell us about what's challenging about them. Are they hard to track? Are they hard
Yeah.
to solve? Tell us about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of break that into both the infrastructure sort of micro outages as well as like application micro outages. Really, it just comes down to something that maybe affects a very, very small cohort of the customers that you have. And so it's not a general outage. I think an example of this is like, let's say that you have a pod or a particular service that,
Mm,
frequently runs out of money and crashes and restarts, or memory,
mm,
sorry, and crashes and restarts. Well, the act of like crashing and restarting, obviously Kubernetes being the way that it is, it's self-healing, it'll move the load somewhere else. For some,
mm,
maybe small subset of customers that was talking to that pod, they might have to refresh their browser to get a new session going, or, maybe it's handled well. But the question becomes, when do I need to actually spend time on finding the root cause of this, out of memory situation? Should I just bump the memory? Well, maybe we don't want to be using more memory. That has other, if I'm just bumping the memory every time, that's going to have cost considerations.
mm,
So engineering is about trade-offs, and dealing with these sort of micro outages is about making these trade-offs. And
mm,
SLOs give you a very nice framework to understand what the severity and the impact is, right? If you're only impacting one out of a 10,000 customers once a month, like you're probably not going to spend the time to go really solve that problem. But
mm,
if it's 100 customers out of 1,000 customers once an hour, right, then it's a bigger deal. So the question becomes like, how much error budget are we burning due to this micro outage?
mm,
It could be caused by a dependency. It could be, and then on the application side, maybe there's a problem in the caching mechanism that you're using, for example. Maybe the cache is getting invalidated too quickly. So these can quickly become, real rat holes for engineers to go down. And it's not always a great use of time to go chase down, every little thing that could cause unreliability, because
right.
that would be all that we do all day. We never build new features.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a great example. So SLOs, I think even the last time you were here, we spoke about SLOs, but I think, yeah, I'm sure that, just the way you apply them in an agentic world as well has led to some changes in just how probably you integrated in your product. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about SLOs, and especially in the past year that the work that you've done
Sure.
related to enabling agentic AI. How has this past year kind of changed your views on SLOs or matured it, evolved it?
Yep.
What's been on your mind in terms of SLOs recently?
Well, we found that one of the biggest challenges for companies to adopt SLOs is to really get a handle on um, what what the adoption is like within individual teams, and how SLOs are being used within individual teams. So SLO adoption very quickly goes from a technical challenge to a governance challenge, which is basically saying, not governance from the standpoint of I'm just going to create a policy that everybody has to have an SLO, and I'm going to check the box if you have the SLO, but governance
Mm,
from the perspective of, does your team that manages a service or a user journey have a set of effective SLOs that are a fair representation of the reliability requirements of that service? And are those SLOs being used to make decisions about technical trade-offs and reliability and inform things like roadmap planning?
mm,
And obviously helping with like the real-time operational challenges from the service. So we've done a lot of work to try to expose the sort of information that a central reliability team might need to figure out, this team needs a little bit more support from you right now because their SLOs aren't really that effective, versus that team is using SLOs very effectively. we'll just keep an eye on that. So one of the things that we launched in the last year was a SLO oversight capability. We didn't call it governance because we didn't want it to be so associated with the compliance, but that's essentially what it is a governance dashboard which
Mm-hmm.
exposes the data of are these SLOs being reviewed on a regular basis, right? You can actually set in Nobl9 now requirements that an SLO actually gets a review, maybe once a quarter, which is especially important, I think, as agents are building more and more of those software. We have good SLOs that reflect the state of the world in our software, and we review those SLOs. It's really the best tool that we have combating the knowledge drift about what's going on with the system. So
Mm-hmm.
are those SLOs getting reviewed, right? We're also looking at the anomalies in the data. So for example, if an SLO is never burning error budget, is that really an effective SLO, right? It probably means that somebody said it and forgot about it. And so we're exposing anomalies like this never burned error budget, or maybe an SLO is always burning the same amount of error budget. That also means that it's probably not really measuring something that's significant in the system. Maybe you don't need that SLO at all, right? And we should delete it. So we're providing those tools in the platform now to understand not just what the SLO is telling us operationally about a product or service, but the actual quality of the signal that we're getting from that particular SLO. And so our customers have been able to, I would say, run much more efficient programs where they're spending less time on the plumbing and more time on, really adding value to the company.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really interesting stuff. And I can imagine that being really useful, not just for SREs, but even for on the business side, stakeholders and product owners and people who working on the business decisions. I'm sure it's
Yeah.
really, really useful for them. Yeah, so I want to just dig into the demo that you have for us in just a minute. But
Yep.
before that, if you want to just tell us a bit about what you've been working on in the past year and any major new releases that you've had in the past few months.
Yep.
I'd love to hear about that before we take a look at the product itself.
Yeah, so one of the big things that we released was a hosted MCP server for Nobl9. So now there's you can basically load this MCP server into an agent or a harness that you're using and start to get information about the state of your SLOs and your error budgets and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we've seen is a significant uptick in the usage of our CLI tools. So we were pretty early to the CLI game, and this may have been my own biases after working at a cloud provider, basically saying that we felt like tools needed to be really developer friendly. And so having a good CLI was table stakes for us. You could basically
Mm-hmm.
do everything in Nobl9 via YAML and CLI that you could do in the GUI. So that essentially made us agent native by default, because agents, and I'll show you some of this in a minute in the demo, and hopefully it all works. You never know with a live demo, and especially with AI. But agents are able to understand our YAML format and understand how to build
Mm-hmm.
SLOs and leverage the CLI to actually be a very effective way to onboard to Nobl9. And so most of the SLOs I personally have built for things that we've done in the last probably 3, 4 months. I'd say ever since Opus 4.5 in November have been
Mm-hmm.
via coding harnesses, I'll show you Claude Code, but using Nobl9 CLI, using tool calls and YAML to actually affect those changes. And the really cool thing is that because the agents are so effective at using CI/CD tools also, they can actually stage your SLOs for you and they can deploy those SLOs to production via CI/CD. They can start to detect whether there's areas of the application that are maybe missing SLOs because they have access to the code base and they understand the code base semantically. And so these are tools that are really powerful for helping us understand reliability when used in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting stuff. Yeah, I'd love to see some of that in action. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
let's dive into the demo.
Let's dive in. And
Right.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best to drive some of this.
Yeah.
And I've got it going on my other laptop here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a Nobl9 window real quick here.
All right. Yeah. See
And
us.
hopefully you can see that there. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So this is a sort of demo environment that we have, and you'll notice that we have a bunch of SLOs here for a Slack bot. This is a Slack bot that I've been working on as a side project to improve what we can do in Slack.
Mhm.
So this is not a live production feature yet, but it's something that we're hoping to get to production pretty soon. Actually, I'm going to switch to our to this view to basically let's see, filter down and just show those SLOs that I'm talking about, and so you can see them. So you have a bunch of SLOs here. So like one of the
Mhm.
things that the Slack bot does is it interprets commands that it gets using an LLM. And so
Mhm.
like we have a particular SLO about the availability of that. And then we have like an event handler and an SLO for that. And we have staging and production SLOs for this Slack app. So
Mhm.
just so happens that I just made a bunch of changes to the authentication modal that we use for this particular Slack app. And so, it's actually an area where we don't have any SLOs yet. So one of the things that I did before we got started, just to make this go a little quicker, is I started up a Claude Code session, and basically said, okay, let's do something with these uh, with this new area. So I said, can you get up to speed on the repo, on the SLOs that we already have? And so one of the cool things is that because those SLOs are as code, they're really just YAML files that we can give access to. We can give the AI access to. So for example, you saw that AI interpretation SLO. And let's actually dive into that, right? So you see there's things like a description, where's that data coming from, Prometheus query for that SLO. So all pretty standard stuff. So I said, hey, we're going to make some improvements to our SLOs. I said, great. What do you want to do? Give me some suggestions. So one of them is, add SLOs for the gaps. So let's say like, let's build some SLOs for the auth flow. And so this is going to take a minute or two to think. And it's gonna go look at the code and see what's already there. I'd say one of the really interesting things is a lot of the time, one of the challenges with SLOs is that metrics need to be instrumented to really get what we want out of that particular SLO. So
Mhm.
we're gonna go read and take a look at what's going on there. We actually have we're using a lot of OTel in this particular repository. And as anybody who's used AI knows, like there's a lot of like enter going on
Mhm.
here. I'm pretty restrictive personally about what I let it do, going between uh, different directories, and in a minute or two, it's going to have a pretty good idea of what it needs to do in order to figure out what's
Mhm.
going on here with some of this.
You wanna like talk to us about some of the things you've done in the background to kind of make these things to be more efficient, like as it's
Yeah, yeah,
well.
sure. So I think one of the interesting things is, again, the tools. So like we have a tool called Slow Kettle, right? And this is this is a CLI tool for interacting with Nobl9.
Mm,
And we have actually built a skill to teach the AI how to more effectively use Slow Kettle. So
mm,
for example, it may typically would have read the docs right ahead of time, and it would know a little bit about the docs, but you can tell it, for example, hey, make sure that you're using the right account before you start calling into this. And so those skills can be very effective.
Mhm.
So here, let's see what this would have found. Current state of the auth instrumentation. It's already emitting a signal, interactive duration. And so here's a recommendation: add a new metric with labels where it can follow the existing conventions that we have, and then we can define some SLOs. OAuth install availability, so we're using OAuth, workspace register availability, user creds availability, and maybe a latency SLO. That sounds pretty good. So the cool thing is it can wire those metrics directly into the handlers that we have, and then it can build the SLOs for us. So what do you think, Twain? Should we tell it to crank? Let's go ahead.
Sure.
And always, I like to work in a work tree. So if I don't like what it's doing, I can blow it away. Would highly
Mhm.
recommend anything you do with agents, require PRs. Do not
Yeah.
let them merge PRs by themselves without approval. So it's a great way to get yourself in a lot of trouble. Although they have gotten a lot better in the last few weeks uh,
Mhm.
at doing some of that stuff.
Yeah, the stuff is just changing so fast and just getting better so fast. It's amazing.
Yeah. And while this is going, we talked a little bit ahead of time about what do we see happening with code review,
Right.
for example. And I think code review is an area for SREs where you can actually get a lot of leverage out of customization, whether you're using one of the tools that's out there or building your own tool. For
Mm-hmm.
example, you can tell a code review bot to check if there's an SLO that's been defined for any new services that are created, or suggest that the submitter create SLOs, and not pass a
Mm-hmm.
code review unless those SLOs are created or defined. And so that's a great way to, I think, shift left the responsibility of reliability to the point where we're developing the feature, where you have the clearest intent of how something is supposed to work. And
Mm-hmm.
again, because it can see the code base and it has the context, through the markdown I've created in the past of how this application is supposed to work. It's a very effective way to go and create SLOs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. And I think that's really vital to like enable that AI can review code well. And how does this happen? Like, where does this the code review happen? Like, do you do that in like when you raise a pull request, you
Yeah,
like
yeah.
request review there or somewhere else?
I think it can happen in a couple places. So one of the things that we did at Nobl9 is we built an internal skills repository where any developer can create skills and make them available for other developers to use. So
Mm-hmm.
in that situation, we actually built a code reviewer skill and a sort of code standards skill. So after it writes the code, you can run the code reviewer skill and get suggestions for how to improve that particular set of code that you wrote before you even PR it, right? Because uh, oftentimes you're testing it and you want it to work before you get to the PR, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
we use code reviews in the PR. So anything you can do an LLM review before it gets to a human review. We at this point, because our business is reliability, still require human reviews for most of the things that we're putting into production. But it obviously can be assisted by LLMs. But there are, I would say, a growing class of fixes that probably don't even need a human review. If you have good testing and
Mm-hmm.
you have good observability and the ability to do things like rollbacks. So I think that's really uh, the new frontier is like how far can you go? And I know certainly there's companies that are building autonomous agents that don't require human code review. So it's what do they say? It's a new frontier for all of us. Yeah.
And do you have like ability to customize how the review is done? Like, could you say, focus on this, don't focus on that? I'm just looking specifically for this to, maybe to give it more focus so it can run faster, maybe. to tell it to just check for this and not for something else. Can you
Yeah,
customize it that way?
for sure, for sure. I mean, so I think that the instructions that you give it are really critical. Our approach has been to have a very lightweight agent to do that, and then sort of the skills based approach based on what we're changing. I think there's certainly out of the box approaches using some of the tools like Reptile that work pretty well. But for us, just having that like sort of additional layer of control has been helpful. Like for example, our code review agent can actually deploy our code to test environments and verify that things work itself. So which
Mhm.
is obviously a step beyond just reviewing the code, right? It's actually doing some of the testing, and not just sort of integration testing or unit testing, but like actual end-to-end smoke tests. Yeah.
Mhm. And I was wanting to ask also about MCPs because they've been as well gaining a lot of popularity and adoption, and with AI, agentic AI workflows as well. Talk to us about some of the reliability issues around MCPs that you see, and some of the ways that Nobl9 can help with that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, MCP is really just a window back to APIs, but
Mhm.
those APIs can form responses in a way that really help the LLM cut down on the number of tokens that are required to get what it needs. So, I think that's one area where, when you look at the number of repeated calls that need to be made, and you start to define, what was a successful interaction versus a failed interaction, SLOs can
Mhm.
be really helpful in prioritizing the features that go into an MCP. Because if you just take an API surface and slap an MCP on top of it and call it done, you're not really building anything that's going to help AI or agents use your product more effectively. You really have to figure out what are the common things that it's asking for. Is there a way to package them up to make them easier for the agent to consume, and then go there? So
Mhm.
we're
Mhm.
we're we're cranking along,
Yeah.
and I did choose like a fairly beefy thing for it to work on. So
Yeah.
we'll see how long this takes. But you can see like whereas before this sort of thing would probably require a lot more back and forth. It's been running
Yeah.
for 7 minutes
Mhm.
now with no interaction.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
I see one of them is checked off, instrument
Yeah,
workspace registration API.
yeah. Yeah, so this is what this is doing is basically there's an API uh, when you install the Nobl9 Slack app in a new workspace, there's an API that's called to register that workspace, right? So that's obviously an API that you want to check, like is it failing? And that actually, I think it's an interesting sort of SLO because I wouldn't expect that you'll get like 100 workspace registrations a day, right? That's probably something that's maybe happening once a day or a few times a day. So having a maybe time slice based SLO might make more sense there, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. While that's going on, actually, there's one other thing that I did want to share, and that is if we pop back over here real
All right.
quick, and again, this is where the SLOs are going to be added. A couple other things I wanted to show you here. One is, I mentioned the SLO oversight dashboard that we have. So again,
Mm-hmm.
we're showing the operational health and the SLO quality. And for example, I can see that, SLOs might have these data anomalies. So within the last 24 hours, we have two new SLOs that have data anomalies. This one in particular, my Slack bot has a lot of anomalies, or sorry, a lot of SLOs that still need to be reviewed. I have not done a good job reviewing these test SLOs. But the
Mm-hmm.
sort of data anomalies that we look for, right? For example, are we getting non-incremental SLI data when we're expecting incremental? So this is one of those areas where are the metrics that you're collecting what we call incremental metrics, where there's the new values are added to the old values, or is each
Mm-hmm.
point independent? Um, for example, error
Yeah.
budget not burning or error budget showing constant burn. So it might be interesting to look at this and say, well, where have we had constant burn, right? And these are actually anomalies. These are metadata that we decorate that you can actually filter for directly. And if we go look at this in SLO details, you'll see that like over this period it was constantly burning. And that probably indicates that something was amiss, right? And if we look at this, like, yeah, somebody didn't spend a lot of time like really building this SLO. Like, it clearly looks like it's kind of garbage in, garbage out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, this is interesting stuff.
Yeah. So now,
Um,
if we flip back to real quick, we flip back to our
Claude Code.
code that we were doing, we'll see that now it's actually authoring those SLO YAML files for us.
Yeah.
And you can see
So that
now that it's got to the point where it's
really helps.
writing the Nobl9 YAML files. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, it. I gotta say, like when we first started using AI, I don't know, a year and a half ago, it would
Mm-hmm.
hallucinate the YAML,
Right.
and so we said, I just don't know if this is ever going to be something that's effective.
Yeah.
But now it not only doesn't hallucinate the YAML, it gets it right, and
Mm.
and it actually does it with intention, to
Yeah.
where the stuff that it's creating seems to be when I review it, and sometimes it needs some tweaking, but it's almost all the way there.
Wow. That's amazing. Uh, Talking about your journey over the past year, and how you view AI, what were some of the aha moments for you in the past year just using AI? Which would you say were one of the milestones or the turning points where you start to see,
Yeah.
okay, this is really good stuff with AI? Any of those moments that you could share?
Yeah, I'd say there were a couple. One was, and I don't know when the exact moment was, but we have a fairly sophisticated code base in Nobl9, and where
Mm-hmm.
I was able to run an agent in our code base and start to ask it questions that were fairly difficult questions to answer about how we did things. And it
Mm-hmm.
was able to start producing answers. And when I checked those answers with engineers, I said, yeah, that's absolutely right. So that's where, like, you start to develop that level of trust that if it understands what's going on, seems to understand what's going on, and then we ask it to do things, then it should be able to do it. And then there was another
Right.
step function in that where, we had a customer report a bug, and we said, can you identify what's causing this bug? Is this a bug? And can you reproduce it, first of all? And then can you identify what's causing it? And it was able to do that. And it was correct. And
Mm-hmm.
then obviously then you take it the next step and you say, okay, fix it. And it does that. And it tests the fix. And so you can start to see the power of where for a lot of these things you can start to get some autonomous interaction.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I guess yeah,
So
you're
so
on this
now
journey.
so it basically it's done everything. It built all the SLOs, and now it's saying, okay, I'm going to try applying these. We're going to use the dry run command, which basically doesn't actually make any destructive changes, but
Mhm.
we're going to validate one of these SLOs, and let's see if that actually worked. And now it's going to do the rest of them because that one looked like it worked. You notice I didn't say always allow it to do these apply commands because it could very quickly delete all of your SLOs from your environment. But that's another area, I think, managing the credentials and what access it has. So this particular credential it has only has access to one project. So I
Mhm.
can guarantee that it's not going to break my production SLOs, for example.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so before I proceed applying these SLOs, yeah, it has pretty good some pretty good ideas there. Yeah,
Mhm.
let's apply the staging SLOs. So again, going back, we instrumented the code, we built the SLOs, we deployed the SLOs, and it hasn't actually failed. And voila, they're there.
Modeling.
And if we pop back over, um, let's go look at our uh, catalog of services, and this is the one that we were dealing with. And if we now go look at this, uh, these are our new auth SLOs, right? That we've
Mhm.
just created, right? And there's no data yet. I haven't actually deployed the changes that with the telemetry yet, so there won't be any data until I do that. But you can basically see here, not only did it build this, but it actually built a pretty good description, why it matters, and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that would taken quite some time for like a human to go through all of this. Probably a
Yeah,
couple of
and
work.
and and to be clear, like I think, if I was really doing this and not just demoing it, I would spend a little bit more time going back and forth understanding, what we're
Right.
measuring and why does it matter and all of those things. But
Mm-hmm.
it's certainly it's in my experience, it gets pretty close to where you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's quite impressive. So, winding down, what would you say over the next 1 to 2 years, that you look ahead, what excites you the most about? I can see you're already quite excited about just agentic AI and just the pace of how things are progressing. What do you feel like is the next step? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a long ways to go. I'm excited about how much more accessible it's making some of these concepts to more and more teams and more organizations. Whereas before, there was a pretty high bar for understanding how to build good SLOs, and the amount of effort required, even when you're using a tool like Nobl9, you still have to take the time to understand how do I instrument maybe some custom telemetry. And now that just feels like table stakes, and so we can focus on the things that actually make people's lives better, right? You're not going to get paged as frequently. You're going to be able to develop more features and know that they're running reliably without having to worry about it. And so that's really what excites me, I think, is just the fact that I think it's going to be make for really a huge improvement for the people that are responsible for the software that we consume.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that was quite a lively conversation, and yeah, just a lot that we dug into. I think really insightful views around SLOs that you have. I love the approach you're taking just around, not just leaving SLOs set in stone, but really reviewing them regularly, replacing the ones that are outdated or not effective with better ones. And just connecting the different pieces like code review and MCP usage, and even being able to use a CLI that's easy for an agent to access. There's just so many pieces that you've been working on over the past year that you mentioned to us that really piques our interest in just what's possible uh, with today when an SRE wants to improve reliability. Things are changing fast, things are getting more complex, but it's talks like this and it's ideas like this that make us to see that things are also getting better as they're getting more complex.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I think that really is the big takeaway for me just from this conversation. So thanks so much, Brian, for joining us. It was a pleasure chatting with you today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Twain. Thanks for having me on.
All right. And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. You got a lot from it as well. Go and check out what Nobl9 is up to. If any of this piqued your interest, they talk a lot more about this on their website, on their blog. So go and check it out over there, their approach in more detail. get in touch with Brian Singer if you want to just talk to him about things you're working on and you want to continue the conversation with him. And with that, we'll see you on the next episode of the Software Plaza podcast. Thank you.